Yeah. Maybe
You know,
they learned that. Maybe they learned that lesson from Altamont, that maybe the Hell's Angels weren't the ideal pick for security.
you live and learn, right? So yeah,
Right, we all do, and that's the
probably
whole
true.
thing.
Yeah.
Bad decisions. Bad decisions. Bad decisions.
Okay, welcome to the Bad Decisions podcast. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. My next guest is a friend of near 35 years. He's a journeyman bass player born in Naples, Italy, to a highly decorated Army colonel and a Neapolitan mother. He's played with the Broken Homes, the Cult, the Black Crows, Izzy Stradlin and the Juju Hounds, Joe Cocker, and countless other projects. He's performed with Ronnie Wood, Johnny Thunders, and Mick Ronson. Welcome, Jimmy.
Hey, buddy. How are you?
Not bad. How are you?
It's been a long time. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I'm in a state of flux as I been bouncing around a little bit with travels and whatnot. So I'm ill-equipped for the high-tech goings on that we have today. But
I like this lo-fi look we have here. It's kind of analog.
Yeah, it's flattering, I think, to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't do anything without 6 lights. I have to be like 1, 2.
Yeah.
3.
Well, I think I have too much light. It's like it's cowboy, high noon, man, at the OK Corral. So yeah, absolutely. Well, we do our best, man.
Yeah, so let's get into it. I've known you a long time, and just to give the audience a little lead in, how I met Jimmy was just happenstance. I was working at a music publishing company in Chicago, which was located in Chicago's best recording studio, the recently closed late great Chicago Recording Company. And I was leaning against Harley Davidson on the sidewalk, smoking a cigarette and drinking my morning coffee. And I see these guys that look like the 1970s Rolling Stones walking toward me. They got velvet jackets on and scarves and cool hats. And I squint and I'm kind of like, that guy looks like Izzy from Guns N' Roses. I'm like, what the hell would he be doing in Chicago, of all places? Then you guys were really nice. You rolled up and Izzy complimented my Harley and told me about all the bikes that he had built. And then you guys were gracious enough to invite me into the sessions. And I'd been in my fair share of sessions, but not so much my kind of music. And so you invite me, I'll stay till you kick me out. So I remember I was there for take a look at the guy and shuffle it all. And I was expecting hard rock. I was expecting Guns N' Roses. And I was like, I haven't heard music like this, because it's kind of Stonesy, but it's also kind of Southern rock. But then there's also flavors of ska and reggae. And I said to myself, I don't know if this is going to sell a lot of records, but I love this record. And I'm to this day, I've always told people, you just want a great record, forget genre, just listen to it. And everyone's just like, how do I not know about this record? And I'm like, it's one of those things.
Well, you were right. It didn't sell many records,
but it's a great record.
It endured, and to the point where a day goes by that someone new has discovered it, which to me has a lot more value.
It made me, I didn't know that much about Guns N' Roses. Of course, I knew their music and I knew their the big characters that were Slash and Axl and Duff, and Izzy was kind of the guy in the background. But when you heard the Juju Hounds record, you just realized the backbone, the framework that really was kind of Izzy's band. Am I wrong?
No, not at all. And the reason, we popped up in Chicago. And then from Chicago, we never stopped moving. We started.
How did you end up in Chicago? Why did you come there of all places?
Well, Izzy had at some point prior to all of this, of course, quit Guns N' Roses, and he came to my house, and after that, and wanted to put a band together, and I knew some of the guys, And he said he wanted a guitar player that sounded like Rick Richards, and I had toured extensively with Rick Richards. So we just called him. And my dear friend Charlie, Charlo Quintana, who had been in seminal bands, played with Bob Dylan, of course, but prior to that, he was in the Plugs, which was like first Latino punk band here in Los Angeles, notably.
I
And then
love Charlie. I loved him as a guy and the way he played.
yeah, he was hilarious as well. You know, behind off stage, which is a lot of times, you know, almost more important than what happens on stage.
And I do want to get into that, like the importance of how it is to sort of get along in a band, because it's very different. You know, session players, they show up, they do their job, they're in service of the song, but you guys, you know, being in a band is a hard thing to do. It's harder. It's like being in a polygamous marriage. Like it's hard enough for two people to get along. Then you get 4 or 5 people that have to get along, and it's a whole kettle of fish.
That's absolutely true, and that's why I tend to. I mean, I'm a band guy to the bone, which means to me, you know, it's a group of guys who share, you know, they share in the risk and they share in the reward. And when you mess with that balance, you know, when there's a principal guys, I mean, there's always a sort of assumed leader of the band, but you know, it's when that person starts to, you know, drill it into you that you're a subordinate that creates problems. So Izzy never did that, and which was what was wonderful, and what facilitated is all of this informs the music that you're going to play.
Yeah, Izzy was
or
a real gentle soul and a really warm guy, and not what I expected from a Sunset
no,
Strip, hard rock, heavy metal band. Because all those guys
absolutely
were
not.
kind of just big personalities and profane and drunk and all that. Not to say that he didn't have his fair share of entertainment products, but he was a real gentle soul, and you know, I don't know, I kind of related to him because he's a Lafayette, Indiana guy, and I'm a Midwestern guy, but there was a real sweetness about Izzy, I thought.
I agree, and unfortunately, that, you know, a lot of that hype and stereotyping, you know, it's easy to judge people you've never met in sort of a knee-jerk reaction based on what you see, and what you see is what you've been allowed to see, you know. So back then, way prior to the proliferation of the internet, there was you know, the yellow journalism, the at the grocery store, you know, the National Enquirer and rag mags like that, and it's really difficult, you know, to ignore that, because you know, when you're checking out groceries in the store, there's your face saying, you know, that you're you know, fucking somebody's girlfriend or what have you, who's in the band, you know, and it creates havoc, you know, in your personal life. And so I think I understand more why Izzy sort of removed himself from public life. I understand that a lot more now than I did then, at the time, because of course I hadn't had that experience in to such a degree as he had, and all those guys
Yeah,
had.
it reminds me of an old David Lee Roth quote where he said, "If you stick your head up above the crowd and you attract attention, somebody's going to throw a rock at you. You buy the land, you get the Indians."
Yeah, man. If you know, the minute you pop your head up, you're in for a world of hurt. Uh, you know, there's some good
take the bitter
aspects
with
to
the
that,
sweet.
you know, but the pleasant, polite exchanges are few and far between. So I
Sure.
get it.
So
I'm sorry.
no, I was going to say, finish your thought, but I wanted you to sort of set the table of what it was like when you came on the scene, because you were living in Naples, Italy, a metropolis, an almost Manhattan-like place with a beautiful coastline, and kind of rough but also cultured Italy, and then you're dropped in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Walk me through that storyline and what the music scene was like compared to now.
They're in Naples. They're really certainly was no music scene at all. So, I mean, but yeah. So, in essence, I because of my familial circumstances, my dad was working at NATO, a huge NATO base in Naples, Italy, and he had
Sorry, but
married. Yeah,
sorry to stop you, but I want people to understand the magnitude of who Colonel James Ashhurst III was. He graduated from the Citadel. He was, uh, you know, Korean War, post-war Korea, Vietnam. He was a battalion commander, Citadel, Army and Navy college. So just sort of explain, the power of who your father was and what an unlikely recipe that you became.
yeah. I guess I'm a product of World War II with my mom's side of the family, which was distinctly Neapolitan from for generations, and so uh, my dad and my mom, so I bounced around a lot as a child. I was born in Italy, but my dad served at the Pentagon. He served at Colorado Springs um, with NORAD and all that good stuff. And his boss in Naples, a base called AF South, uh, Allied Forces, Southern Europe. His direct boss was Admiral Stansfield Turner, who went on to head up the CIA. So basically, he was in a liaison position, and so he was working internationally with the. There was some kerfuffle with the Greeks and the Turks at that point, and so I remember him getting really frustrated about that. The Middle East, of course, always in turmoil. And
What about he was involved in the nuclear program too, wasn't he?
a little bit early on. Yeah, he was in Missile Command. So he would have been in Nevada for a lot of those tests. And frighteningly, he told me, he didn't say much about any of this stuff, but he was, they set up a bunch of officers, to observe this event. They were going to kick off one of these bad boys in the desert, and so there was a huge trench. They dug a trench that was like 7 feet deep, and they'd issued everyone like these opaque glasses that were about a half-inch thick of just completely opaque plastic. And then they were instructed that, they had a little pit helmet on, and then, they covered their eyes. And when the thing went off, he said he saw through, the plastic and through his hand, and he saw an X-ray of the bones in his hand. In that
God.
moment. Yeah, and then of course the wind changed, and so then the fallout was falling, right on top of the tin pot helmet, so. He was getting irradiated pretty severely before I was born, mind you. So
that might explain something.
A little bit, maybe, yeah. Well, I think all of that informed my my life in general, and all of it, because I was, Italy at the time was considered a conflict zone by the Department of Defense, and so our Department of Defense, because there have been a lot of kidnappings and whatnot going on, and kids like me were, turning up in trunks of cars and stuff like that. Happened to a general up in Verona, I believe. So yeah, there were a lot of and Europe in general. There were, this was the time of the Baader Meinhof gang and the Black September, and these rather, violent terrorist organizations, and so they were, I was a target, so I was issued, sort of dog tags as a day one baby, and these are mine. So they wanted to keep, and there's two, you know how they work, right? So there's one that tells you the religion on there, so they know which hole to dump you in,
Right, and there's two, one for your toe and one for between your teeth. Is that right?
Yeah, they snatch one off of your body, and they
Dark.
keep the other one for the records. But yeah, so that
Uh,
informed my whole thing. And they're I'm not alone. I'd like to stress. There are
yeah.
loads and loads of people, which on moving to Los Angeles, I had never really encountered as many people who had no idea that how much personnel we have globally at any moment. And these aren't just military bases. They're military bases with schools, with parks for little kids, with swimming pool or whatever, because you have to take care of the families as well.
Sure.
And so the schools I attended were Department of Defense schools, but they were they were sort of the teachers and the personnel were volunteers, many of them, or civilian people that were teachers in the States and just volunteered for this sort of duty or had some connection to the place. So in Italy, I would go, high school and all of that was with mostly American kids, but we lived in the city. Most of the Americans sort of grouped together in a town in the outskirts, and we were right in the city. So I spent the morning and the afternoon with Americans, and then came home, and there was no kids around other than Italian kids. So that's how I learned the language and the dialect and all of that stuff. That I'm very happy to have that.
Yeah, so in some circuitous way, I mean, you've always had wanderlust. You've always been what Buddha called a seeking spirit. So you're kind of, in some ways, just like your father, but without all the nukes and death and destruction, but the travel.
Yeah, and I find there's several people that I sort of connect with, whether I've met them or not, that have had similar circumstances. And so over time, I've been able to kind of put together, Joe Strummer is one of them. His father was in the Foreign Service, the British Foreign Service, and he was born in Turkey.
And you guys were
Um,
close, right?
yeah. And I mean, brief,
Tell the
but
audience who Joe Strummer is. We just have to
oh, I'm
assume,
sorry.
I
Yeah,
I have a lot of young people, so set that up.
sure. Joe Strummer was the singer for the Clash, British uh, rock and roll band
To say
from
the
London.
to
Yeah,
say the very least, yeah.
yeah,
All right, so
absolutely.
go on.
So yeah, Jim Morrison's dad was an admiral, I believe, and
Correct.
there's many of them. I know a lot of them.
Terrence Trent D'Arby,
Uh,
right?
I think he served in the service. I think he was in the army briefly, but so a lot of these guys I find, and the ones that I speak to, never really forgot their experience, and they continue to have a sort of desire for bouncing around. And I think we've got early on. I figured we've only got the one planet so far, and I'd really kind of like to check it out. Before I myself check out. I'd like to see as much of it as I can. So, been
Uh,
successful in that. You know, uh, if not anything else.
Okay, so you're a teenager, if memory serves. You go from Naples, Italy, to the burbs, to then a not very developed Cerritos, California. Tell me about that culture shock, and tell me about what the music scene was like. Tell me what the Sunset Strip scene was, the bands you that you got
Yeah.
to know, that you played with, the people you met, the personnel. Walk me through that.
I don't know that times have changed that much. I mean, there's still a rather ill-informed populace out there that assumes, for example, they were, asked me questions like, what did you do? How did you get around? It's like, we have cars, Italy makes them. And they just assumed that we were, in the back of ox carts, like whipping, it was just absurd. And to the point where I became very sort of disillusioned with the whole thing. And so my ticket to ride was when I very luckily, we, in America, you get your driver's license at 16. And so once I got that, that was my ticket to explore a little bit. And I immediately found Hollywood and, the area where I eventually moved to and am now. And so it really was a freedom, and that's a theme that's gone on through my entire life. I find that the centers of cities are multicultural, and people are aware, a little bit more aware, and a little bit more tolerant of the odd man out, the strange guy who dresses different from everyone else and says weird things, and so and at that time, Hollywood was just a bubbling cauldron of that, and this predates what a lot of people assume was the Sunset Strip scene. The Sunset Strip's been around for a long time, and it was there prior to the arrival of Poison and all of the Sunset
Rat
Strip
and
band.
Quiet Riot.
Right. I mean, we're talking about, a really long time, a really long history, and that people tend to gloss over. I mean, at least in my view. I don't know if what I'm seeing on the internet is just because of who I am. It's tailored to me, but it seems like, it seems like some of these bands were like Jesus Christ when there was a whole lot of stuff going on prior to that, and that's kind of what I ended up being entranced by and eventually becoming a part of prior to the arrival of Guns N' Roses or anyone else.
There were not a lot of bands being signed out of LA back then, and if my memory serves, like Van Halen was sort of like the first detonation of an atom, but the Broken Homes, which you did 3 records with MCA Records, and your guitar player was Craig Ross, who's played with Lenny Kravitz all these years and one of my favorite guitar players with exquisite hair, by the way. Tell me what the scene was like when you dropped into it.
Well, it was a burgeoning.
Who was playing?
It was a burgeoning punk scene that was sort of informed a lot by what had been happening in the UK, and the early '80s with the Clash and the Pistols, and people sort of took a cue from that, and so there was a ska scene in Hollywood. There was the Paisley Underground, a lot of psychedelic stuff happening. Bands like Red Cross and then ska bands like Fishbone sort of came out of a club called the On Club, which
I knew Angelo.
it predates all of the stuff that you normally hear about now that's become a mainstream sort of obsession. But there's always been, there's a mainstream and an underground. Let's get that clear. There always will be. There always has been.
To be sure, but you were all sort of part of a community. You knew and still know the Black Crowes guys. Tell me some of the people that when you were all kind of starting out, you knew the Guns N' Roses guys. Let's talk about how these bands were formed and how it all came together.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there was a real punk rock influence, and then but then to me, what happened in Southern California was the punk rock became increasingly more violent. It was a dangerous thing to go to a show, and you'd see a line of ambulances outside, along with the cops on horses and the whole thing, beating people up. So that's why the ambulances were there. Was when they when they clobber you with the stick, they put you in the box and drive off, never to be seen again. But it was I think it was frightening to a lot of people, and so I think that's why the police presence was so prevalent people didn't know what to make of it. The numbers of young people that would congregate at these shows, and a lot of them undoubtedly couldn't get in, so there'd be activity on the street where there hadn't been for years before that. So they never witnessed the beginning of the scene, and a lot of people didn't like it. But but of course, I was never into that. I'm into songs, man. I'm into rock and roll songs, and so the more you start to put together that a lot of those bands, like my friends in the Damned, showed me very early on as a teenager. They were recording at Pete Townshend's studio, and I was able to observe, to see like what a fan of the Who they were, when that sort of went contrary to what people, punk is a revolution, it's punk or nothing, and that's absurd. And so they had toured with T-Rex, Mark, he gave me one, Mark Bolan's jacket that Mark had given him.
It is absurd because real musicians love real music. Like Ozzy Osbourne listens to the band Chicago.
Yeah, great.
Ozzy likes Green Day.
It's songs, man. It's the observers that tend to pervert the or misunderstand.
100%. Thank you.
Yeah. So, it's
I love metal. I love Chet Baker.
Yeah. I mean, you're allowed. It's all subjective. Everything is subjective, and you certainly can't criticize anyone for their choices. Although you can note that maybe they've been misinformed, is the best you can do, or suggest some other things, that there is a thread through all of this that unites all of it. And really, in essence, it's the songs that endure, and they endure for a reason. And so, a lot of the vast majority don't endure, and I fear that's what we're facing now. It's like a disposable product. It's literally around for, by the time you hear of it, it's probably gone. So that is a heartbreaking development for guys like me, but there's not a damn thing we can do to change it, really.
No, it just is. But what I really want to know is, is the stories we've collected, where bad decisions lead to good stories, what you've learned along the way. Most of my wisdom, I'm not infinitely wise, but I am infinitely experienced. Anything most young people have done, we've already overdone. So this is what we're trying to.
You've been around a little bit, Scott. I'll give you that.
Yeah, we both have. You may have a couple years on me, but not many. So let's talk. Let's talk the road. The Juju Hounds went out with Keith Richards and the Expensive Winos. I know you supported greats like Stevie Ray Vaughan, In Excess, Joan Jett, Jerry Lee Lewis. Tell me about some of those people and those experiences and what you learned from them, and so maybe some funny anecdotes.
Oh man,
talk about Keith.
Well,
he's my deity.
Until recently, fairly recently, Keith has been a mystery to most who haven't had the good fortune of being in a room with him. And but now he seems to be, with the internet and all of that stuff, he seems to be posting regularly, and they're always entertaining, and his his words of advice are always.
But he's always so happy.
He is a happy man.
What's not to love? I mean, he's a Rolling Stone.
Nothing not to love. Absolutely. And he's one of the, he's a character, and so these guys are, it's like a unicorn, as are his bandmates, and these are personalities that are important. Unfortunately, unless you're Keith Richards, further down the ladder, I'd say people in the industry tend to shy away from the characters. You know, if you're a handful, or if you require attention, or if you simply disagree with what's happening to you, then that you're then labeled hard to work with, or someone will make a snap decision as to, and that can end your career. So I've managed to.
what did you learn? What did you learn from Keith?
Oh man, learn a lot about how to live. All of these guys,
Example.
not just him.
That's
Well,
okay.
yeah, it's the sense of humor, I think, is something that has always been of paramount importance, and it serves a lot of purposes. You know, I mean, first you kind of have to have a knack for it, and also it puts the people around you at ease. And so, the first time I met him, he said, hey, grab a guitar over there and blues in E. I'm like, I'm not a guitar player. And he goes, you are today. So, and it was blues in E, and things like that. There was no way around it. You were in his world, and you're lucky to be there.
You told me he had a road case that was his bar with Stolichnaya vodka and Orange Crush.
Oh yeah, I think at the time it was vodka and orange juice of whatever,
or orange soda.
Or yeah,
Which I thought that, I mean, it's not that much of a luxury when you're a Rolling Stone, but I was just like, that's so cool. He's just got like a mobile on wheels, anvil case with a bar full of Russian vodka and Orange Crush. I thought that's just kind of punk and cool. And of course, everybody knows the shepherd's pie story, how he's got the same old lady chef that makes a shepherd's pie for every show. And if anybody dares take the first slice of the shepherd's pie, they are fired. And if Keith doesn't feel like having shepherd's pie that night, guess what? Nobody's eating shepherd's pie. And I think it's okay to have your idiosyncrasies.
I think it's the Stones operate on a completely different level from any other band I've ever been around. They've been doing it for so long. They're consummate professionals, of course, and they've learned a lot of lessons. You don't want the security detail to be a bunch of giant gorilla guys that attract attention, and so you don't really know who the security guys are because they look like everybody else, the Stone securities, I should say. And you come to find out real quickly that they're usually retired special forces, like SAS guys and guys of that nature, who are very quiet, but you'll be in a room, and what happens, unfortunately, often is somebody will have too much to drink and they become unseemly, and the voices are raised, and there's a little kerfuffle in the corner, and the next time you turn around, the guy's just vanished, gone, like very quietly.
Well, maybe,
there's no I mean, somebody opened up a little door or a curtain, and the guy, that was the end of the guy, and you don't see him again. So it was,
maybe the Stones
maybe the
Stones learned their lesson from maybe they learned that. Maybe they learned that lesson from Altamont, that maybe the Hells Angels weren't the ideal pick for security.
You live and learn, right? So,
right, we all do, and that's the whole
true.
thing.
Yeah, indeed.
Tell the Mick Jagger elevator story.
Well, this was at I think it was a Bill Graham event, and it was one of the first pay-per-views of a concert. I think that was in history. I think it was on hosted by On TV or whatever the service was, but it was a Bill Graham had organized it. But the only venue that was suitable was coincidentally the Donald Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City,
Atlantic
right?
City.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and so which is a whole other topic, but the I had been invited because the Stones had just days prior to that, the opening act had been GNR at Guns N' Roses at the LA Coliseum. And so I'd gone along with Izzy, and then the next day he knew we were buddies, and so he's like, dude, we got invited. The Stones invited us, and you're gonna be my, come on, we're going on a plane where you're gonna be my guest. And so I went, and with Axel and their manager at the time, Alan Niven. So it was just the four of us, I think, girlfriends, what have you, and so that's why I was there, and
Okay.
and so
So it's you, Izzy, and Axel at the show.
me, Izzy, Axel, and well, they were supposed to perform as a special guest, right? So I was just there,
Okay.
kind of like tagging along, and so they
So
were
you
going
went
to
with
do
you
a
went you
song.
went with Guns N' Roses to the
I
show.
did,
I'm
yeah.
just trying to. Okay. All right. Go on.
Well, the two guys and the manager.
Yeah.
So yeah, it
Yeah.
was us on the plane. We went there, and I mean, of course, everything was on the Stones' tab, the rooms, transportation, security, all that stuff. So for each of us, and it was just no expense was spared whatsoever. I mean, it was a fantastic experience all around, and and so we were basically on the stage, and so there's a little there was a little dugout, so on the stage for wives and girlfriends and family, and this was at
Right.
this time, that was, and so I watched the show from there. So I'm like, I'm a knee level to these guys, and it was just amazing to watch that entire production come together. And so during the show, Mick would, I think during Sympathy for the Devil, Mick would do the thing where he rides an elevator up and reappears as Lucifer at the very top of the stage, and of the rigging, and there's an elevator taking him up and down. So I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of off in the wings behind Ronnie's amp, and I see Mick. The lights go down, and he comes walking. He walks right past me, and gets into the elevator. But he's like snapping, you, the manager, the booking, the agent, the guy in the clipboards, and everyone surrounds him. And as I watch him go up in the elevator, and the song's still going on, he's in the middle of the song, and he's firing questions at these people. What are the numbers? What are the merch numbers? And they're giving him the report. It was like the board of directors, giving him the sales numbers for the entire and then please let me. It's just phenomenal thing to witness. It was,
Well, and that's, to me, that's an important lesson. Mick went to the London School of Economics. He's more than the greatest frontman in the history of rock and roll. He knows to the penny what his business is doing at any given time, and I think that's really important in any business. You can't just be an artist.
That's true. And as art versus commerce. Over time, however, I see there's limits to everything, and I think we've far surpassed the limit of greed and disregard for the product. In favor of a short-term money grab. And I think maybe there are some people starting to realize that why are there no rock and roll bands of that caliber?
But here's the thing, I think. But every generation's had schlock. We had Sean Cassidy and Andy Gibb and all that Teen Beat and Tiger Beat and stuff. But I think every generation also has good stuff too.
There was always room to sneak in, and most notably to me is the people in who sort of, you know, hold the keys to the city, the business folks, you know, they're not necessarily that informed about music. And so what what tends to happen is they need, someone needs to break that ground, and you need to show them what it is, you know. There was no you know, I think I saw something the other day where someone was saying there was no Jimi Hendrix. And so, you know, Jimi Hendrix showed up and showed people, you know, that there is value in that. Of
Noel
course, you,
Gallagher. Yeah.
yeah, it was him. Yeah, yeah. And I enjoyed that very much because I agree
And here,
wholeheartedly.
do you think, because I think that DJs and terrestrial radio being wiped out had a lot to do with it, because I learned about a lot of bands from guys who just played whatever they wanted. And then when Clear Channel went and bought every radio station in the country pre-internet, and there was one program director deciding, you know, you know, corn slop was going to be fed to the hogs before their slaughter. I think that was sort of the beginning of the end for music for me in a lot
Well,
of ways.
when people, you know, people tend to say, "Oh, I miss the music, you know, scene or the business as it used to be," is like, you know, I usually respond, it wasn't that great to begin with. So, I mean, you know, it's better than what we have currently, but it was a very flawed system, and there has been no demise of terrestrial radio. That's everything is informed to this day, inexplicably, is informed by how many radio stations you're on between here and New York City. Let's say, you know, we have a vast 99% of this country is in the middle there, and those radio stations still will determine the number of plays. Still, without any explanation, hasn't been updated. They still inform your chart position, and they
Yeah.
inform, you know, a lot of other metrics that people then look at. So
But
it
the, but
begins at radio.
Yeah, but there
Still,
are fewer arbiters of culture. There are, you know, one program director for tens of thousands of stations, which I think is unfortunate.
right. That was
Um,
a rock
eh,
line, you know, and these guys, long form radio DJs, Jim Ladd here in
sure.
LA.
Yeah.
Um, uh, this program, if you can find it on the internet, absolutely. So yeah, they had a freedom and the ability to take a chance. You know, so you'd end up with uh, someone with a little bit of an imagination, which doesn't exist anymore. It's all on a cart, and you know, these are the approved songs for whatever, and so you get that repetition. When that repetition happened, when you're hearing it at the grocery store and the gas station, it seeps into your consciousness. So now you know the names; they become a household name, and that's unfortunate because people are ignoring the vast majority of what is available, and a lot of people are never able to find it, or they don't care enough to look.
Got you. Getting back to Juju Hound. So you had some very special guests on that record. Who were they? What did they play? What did they play on, and how did you get them? You had Ronnie Wood. I believe you had Nicky Hopkins. Am I right about that?
Yeah, you are. Yeah. Well,
All right. So
we actually, I think Nikki called me on that one because you know, we didn't get these people. They were they, they were around and friends. I had played a lot with Ian McLagan's From the Faces and Ronnie's bandmate
thank
in the
you.
Faces,
Yeah.
and the Rolling Stones and most other great rock and roll bands. You know, he can be heard on. So and seen. He toured quite extensively with the Stones as well on a couple of
Sure.
tours, I believe. Anyway, so he had become a buddy here, and another person who informed me a lot about living in general. And we had become friends, and he had played on some of my band's records, and he really liked that stuff, and that's how we met. And then he invited me to ultimately. I just asked him, well, why isn't he playing? And I haven't got a band, And so
Great.
I think Craig and I just turned up at his house and said, hey, we're your band if you want. He goes, great, rehearsals on Sunday. So so we did a lot of playing with him, a little bit of recording, and that was me and Craig Ross. And then we so when the opportunity came, and during some of those shows, Ronnie would show up, passing through LA, and we would do some of the Faces classic, like Cindy Incidentally and Ooh La La and all that. So we're playing them live in little clubs, here in LA,
Stay
which
with
was
me.
yeah, absolutely. So we were, it was glorious, and so when the time came, for Izzy to want to make a rock and roll record, we obviously had similar tastes in music, and so we just got these guys, and
Cool.
and through Ian McLagan, I think that's where the Nicky Hopkins, and Nicky had just heard about it, so he ended up calling me up, and you're not gonna
Okay.
turn him down.
Okay, so I'm gonna just sort of there are things that are not in my notes that are getting triggered back from memory. So I'm gonna throw a name at you, and you share an anecdote if you like. Andy Johns. Now I met Andy Johns through you at the Sunset Marquee Hotel at the Whiskey Bar one night, and we had a very fun, story packed, boozy evening, and then his nephew, was it Glenn Johns' son or Andy's son? What was his name?
Glenn Johns' son, Ethan Johns.
Yeah, you took me to a session, and they were playing around with a Chamberlain or a Mellotron or something.
Yeah.
And let's talk about Andy Johns. And to those who don't know, look up Andy Johns' discography. It's unbelievable. It's the Rolling Stones. It's Led Zeppelin. It's Deep Purple, I think. Just, but
Yeah,
whatever.
loads of
But talk,
stuff.
yeah, Van
I think
Halen. Talk about Andy.
I read somewhere that between he and his brother Glenn, they had like 33% of like the greatest albums of all time, which is an
Yeah,
insane
yeah,
number.
Beatles.
Yeah, I believe it. And Andy was one of those guys, man. One of those unicorns, one of those characters. And a lot of people found him abrasive, and that ended up hurting him in the end. As time went on, and things sort of modernized, and the transition to digital, he didn't take to it very well, or he refused to, really, because he could see immediately the limitations of it, and he didn't see the convenience. He saw the limitations, and so he was already a handful. And someone once told me, well, he's a mess. He drinks a lot and all that. And I said, yeah, but so he's hung over for the first 4 hours, and he's drunk for the last 4 hours. But it's the 4 hours in between where he just made something that no one else can do. So
No one else can do. So tell me
right.
how you met him. Tell me what you worked with him on, and tell me what you learned from him.
Well, I think at that time he hadn't completely ruined his ability to get suggested for projects, and so we were a rock and roll band. Excuse me. And he's a rock and roll guy. So and there weren't a lot of us on major labels with the resources to hire him, and so he invited us up to the house. He came to rehearsals. We back then you do pre-production, so you know what you're doing. And
Yeah.
and he was there for all of that, and then invited us up to the house. And I think it was, he's like, all right, you guys, and he passed out like Western, like cowboy gun belts with actual guns in them, like revolvers, and then big
as you
cowboy
do.
hat. Yeah, and a big house on Mulholland, and we sat there playing poker, and until at one point, and then there was the backyard of his house. There was stacks and stacks of televisions that all had big bullet holes in them. And I asked his wife about it. Oh, Andy, he doesn't like what's on television, But so
Right.
that's how we met.
Elvis,
But no,
Elvis style. Yeah.
yeah.
So
So
go.
we're like, we're in, man. Let's do it, and we did, and so he ended up producing our second album, I believe. Not the third one, but the second one. I don't think anyone wanted to invite him back, unfortunately. But yeah, when the digital thing came about, it was everyone really focused on the importance of speed. Like who's fast on with Pro Tools, the early versions of it. Who's the fastest editor, and it's not speed. We're not in the speed business, fast is convenient, but again, we're back to that same lesson. So he stopped getting work.
Performance is omnipotent for sure.
It is, and live performance is the one thing that a machine can't do. And so these are,
well, except everyone plays with sequence tracks now.
Yeah, but they're sequenced. Well, anyway, they are using. Yeah, what you see isn't necessarily what you get.
All right, you brought the Damned up a little while ago, and I want to jump back to that for a second. Will you please tell that amazing story about you and Stiv Bators and the guns to your head?
Oh yeah, indeed. I mean, I don't know. It's an unfamiliar audience for me, but I have told the story before. But it was generally a chaotic situation during that time, and so we had been on tour with the Georgia Satellites. We had booked there was a show booked for a long time, and they had
which band? Which band?
The Georgia Satellites. Oh, my bad. The Broken Homes.
You were with the Broken Homes. Where? And the gig was where?
At the Roxy, and it was a big deal because we were on MCA Records and they were on Atlantic Records, and their tour manager is a dear friend. Whose call I just missed. He, sort of developed an idea for a ruse. We were going to switch the running order to allow for the executives from Atlantic Records to see us, and they wouldn't have seen us otherwise. So that it was a very gracious thing to do in an industry where there's usually camaraderie and grace is absent. So they were doing us a favor, and so last minute, Stib called me up. Hey, I want to come to the show, but you got to come pick me up. So I'm like, fuck, right. So I navigate over to the what was then the Holiday Inn on Cahuenga, right? And we're up on the 19th floor, and I mean the man took friggin' hours, to get, he was just tripping around in the, might need this and I need this, and he's pulling things out of drawers or whatever. I'm like, we gotta go, man.
And the gig.
Yeah, and so it was him and his girlfriend. So finally, we were able to bundle him out, and we were walking down the hall. The girlfriend's locking the door, and these two thug, sort of cholo guys, but they were white guys, like kind of prison guys looking. And we just hear this, they walk past us. How you doing? How you doing? And we, we hear a noise. We turn around. They've got her down with a huge gun. It was like massive, chrome plated, big old son of a bitch. And they got that to her head. And so then there were, empty your pockets. I had like $3. Stiv had a bunch of French francs, and they didn't know what that was. And so, so anyway, then they
Geniuses.
say, we go back in the room. And that's when I started to worry because, in behind closed doors. But they, so now there's one guy's rifle in the room, and then one guy's got his knee on my back. I'm face down. We're both face down. And
you get a full house waiting for you at the Roxy.
Yeah. And so I'm sweating it, and I got my car keys in my hand, right? And that's all I could think about was a show, And so anyway, they got in the gun. I could feel the gun going back and forth with me and Stiv and whatnot. And so anyway, long story short, this thing goes on for a little while, and then they leave, with the announcement, don't fucking move, don't pick up the phone. We got a guy watching, which of course they don't. And so we wait, count to like whatever. I'm like 10, 9, 8, 7, whatever the fuck. And it's like dead quiet. And then I go, come on, Stiv. There's nobody at the fucking end of the hall. We gotta go.
Yeah, gotta
go. And I turn over. I'm like, Stiv, and he's like he fucking passed out dead asleep, and he's snoring. I'm like, man, we gotta go. And so he'd fallen asleep.
I wish I could be that good of a sleeper that I could.
Yeah,
sleep
me
through
too.
Me too. I can't even sleep through a quiet night.
But the worst part about it is, I double parked on Sunset. I run through the front of the venue, through the crowd. I'm scrambling up on the stage. They're paging me, and the whole place is packed. And nobody in my band believed this, man. They look at me, and then they see Stiv, and we both kind of had a little
partying.
bit of, yeah. And so, our hair's like sticking straight up because we were like scared to death. Moments ago, and still to this day, and we left after the gig. We left and went back to file the police report because I was like, no, we're not dealing with fucking cop before the I got to do the show. And we came back, and then by then the cops didn't believe us because they're like, what do you mean? You left the scene and all that shit. So nobody.
Yeah, the LAPD's never been a fan of doing the work.
Nah, and so now he's gone. And his girlfriend is also sadly gone. And so now there's nobody to corroborate my story but me. So
well, I've known it a long time, so I can ancillarily corroborate it. So let's keep artists jumping. So you were fortunate enough to work with the late great Mick Ronson, one of my favorite guitarists, Ziggy Stardust, Bob Dylan. I mean, just what a unique voice. And then he had a unique way about how he described downbeat. Can you talk about what it was like working with Mick Ronson, his significance to music, and what you did with him?
Yeah, I mean, he was just a fabulous individual. Another gentle soul and super friendly guy, and also hilarious. But he was a multi-instrumentalist. I mean, people know about his guitar playing first and foremost, but he did string arrangements. He was a very classically trained Lou Reed and whatnot. And he would just write notation down, for a string part, orchestral string part, which is pretty insane.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know anyone who could read music. I can't read music. So he was a very, very, very serious musician. And but this is in pre-digital days. This was still in the 80s. So we were in a studio, and I think we got on the subject of I was slowly learning how to play bass, really. Still am. So I was, very curious and about how the recording experience is far different from the live. It's a completely different thing. And so I'm learning how to play in the studio, being very curious about it. And so I was like, we're talking about, I'm like, what's all this behind the beat, ahead of the beat stuff? And so he was explaining it to me, and then he took the time to do that, which I'll be forever grateful. But he
Describe it if you could in a minute or so.
he in a minute he grabbed it. Yeah, hang on, man. God damn it, Scott. I gotta get a writing utensil, man. I'll get a piece of chalk.
Well, you okay. You could just describe it too, if it's better.
So we're talking about what you hear all the time, behind the beat and ahead of the beat. So he gets a thing, piece of paper, and he goes like that. So he goes, that's a straight line. That is time, right? That's time.
Yep.
And then he puts a dot in the middle, and he says that is that point. That's a point. That point has no duration. It's just a locator on the wheel of time.
Timeline.
Right?
Yeah.
On the timeline. And he says, now this is a kick drum note, and it's rather large. Well, let me do that bigger. Here's a kick drum note.
For the listeners, it's a circle on the piece of paper.
Okay. Yeah, it's a larger circle than the next circle, which is, he goes, that's your note. That's the duration of a bass note. It's a bigger sound. And he said, and then here, guitar part, depending on what the sound is, maybe a little bit smaller. And he said, depending on where, he goes, so this kick drum takes up that space. It's perfectly in time, but you can move it here or here, and it'll still be in time. You can scooch it, a little bit. It won't be absolutely in time. So you can fudge it a little bit, and that will create an atmosphere in an ensemble group of players. So you're reacting on the drummer that you have, not only on his playing, but you're emotionally connected to this person as a human being that you know. And so you get into little games where you're trying to outdo each other. You're trying to, trick each other sometimes. And that's the human element. And that is impossible to reproduce
or teach, even.
Or teach, or to be reproduced by a machine, because a machine deals in absolutes. Here's quantized, the time,
binary.
There is no wiggle room. Which translates to almost everything in life. The law, for example, you're in the desert, at a crossroads in the desert, and there's a stop sign, right? And you roll the stop sign because there's nobody around for fucking hundreds of miles, right? But the camera that saw you, you're either behind the line or you're ahead of the line. There's an absolute. You could be a millimeter past it, and you're now a criminal. You've broken the law. So that it takes a human to interpret that, saying, well, these are the circumstances around how this event happened, how this person broke the law. But if you leave it to a machine, you're going to go to jail, right? And and that is that's in essence where we are.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm no pro musician like you are, but I've spent my time around a lot of live shows and making of records, and I surround myself with a lot of musicians, and I try to explain to somebody the majesty of a song as simple as Honky Tonk Women, and how Charlie and Keith and Bill would kind of hang back at the beginning of the song that just kind of sets the groove, and then they're kind of right on in the middle of the song, and then they're kind of almost rushing toward the end of it, and that's the part that makes you shake your ass. And there's so many artists that were great at it, but that was just the first one that popped into my head.
There's a visceral reaction with other human beings that they don't necessarily notice, that makes you shake your booty. and it makes you dance, and it makes you react physically. It makes you not unable to sit still. You know, you're tapping on something. That's a
Yeah,
groove.
most people don't know what bass is or does or can't even hear it. They're like, I don't hear the bass player. I'm seeing him do stuff, but I don't hear it. And I'm like, you don't have to hear it. It's the part that makes you shake your ass in a Stevie Wonder song.
Indeed. That's why I always, you know, learned to Motown, because they had they valued the bass part quite a bit, and it would sometimes,
Jamerson.
you know, inform the song or lead the ensemble group. And that's how you learn, because when you're learning, you're trying to play along to stuff, and if you can't hear it, you know, that's why I gravitated to Motown and reggae later on, because it's there, because they consider it important. And I found that
How do you approach a song? How do you write a part?
uh, that thought, I think I found that British music, even in rock and roll, the bass player always played a very important part. Of course, everyone knows the John Entwistles, you know, and these are irreplaceable people. They're not just a utility guy that you can replace with someone else. It's a one of a kind human being. And then the recordings are everyone's equal. You can hear it. And so when you're trying to learn, you know, you need to hear it. So you end up playing with those guys. For whatever reason, in American rock and roll, with few exceptions, Cheap Trick being one of them, where they value Tom, obviously, for good reason, but a lot of them tend to consider the bass player sort of a throwaway guy, or that
Yeah,
is
just a
very
guy who has to
easy.
know where one is and get the chords
Yeah, and
changed.
we'll get another guy if he fucks up. You know, we'll just get somebody else.
You know how I learned what bass did was listening to the Beatles, because they were few tracks in the thing. So I would like put on Dear Prudence and I would pan it hard left or hard right. I can't remember where they put it in the track, and I'd hear Paul going boo doop boo boo doop boop boo doop boop
Yeah,
boo doop, which I couldn't really hear it with the song until I heard it sort of semi-isolated with a lead vocal.
I mean, if it sparks your interest, you're going to investigate. You know, if it's something like,
Yeah.
wow, what's going on there? You know, I mean, you have to understand what the bass is, and you have to be able to hear it. Like my mom, for example, she couldn't differentiate. You know, it's like there are people who hear music as like a brick. You know, it's like all one piece,
That's right.
and she never she never understood, you know, what I did.
Yeah, but just like my mother has no idea what the word Photoshop even means, but she'll look at a
Yeah,
photo and in her Chicago accent, she'll be like, "Something's not right about this picture. I don't know what
yeah.
it is." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's totally over retouched." And she goes, I don't know what that is."
Yeah, bless
And
her
she doesn't
heart,
need
bless
to
her
know
heart.
what it is, because the human brain can distinguish between good and bad, between done and
Yeah.
overdone, and all that stuff. And Jimmy, since you brought up this stop sign in the middle of the desert, I would be remiss to not get into your scrapes with the law. So
Ah,
it
man,
was
man.
it was sometime after the Juju Hounds were over and before Buckcherry started, and you developed a not so insignificant heroin problem.
I
And
did.
then
Yeah, I
and
did do
then
that.
and then and then which in and of itself isn't the worst thing in the world, but you weren't really showing up to your court dates, and it turns out judges really hate that. So I
They don't
remember you
like it.
calling me and telling me the sheriffs kicked your door down and you had to kick dope handcuffed to a concrete bench in LA County jail. Can we talk about your, which I was so angry about that, because I was just like, this guy is hurting no one but himself. Guy has a drug problem. He's never stolen anything. And and suddenly you were with a bunch of hardened criminals who didn't give a fuck that you knew Keith Richards.
No, I didn't tell anyone about that, man. That would have been.
Uh,
I just went in as a completely different person. I was like individual.
and you're not a big guy.
I was an individual. You know, a number. You know, 500,000.
All
And
right, so let's talk about that life shock.
yeah, that was wild, man. But uh, you know, they said, you know, I was a danger to myself. which is
Yes, you
a
are.
wild thing to say to someone, who thought it hadn't even crossed my mind. But I had been on a steady self-destruct path. I went into it sort of informed about the you hear about it all your life, and I had avoided it most of my life until my mid-30s, and I was just apoplectic about the dissolution of the Juju Hounds. It was my favorite band. I know how we had a 1 in a million shot, and I know how difficult that is. I think some people may take that for granted, but it's in my life. I've been very fortunate that I've been given a shot on 3 different occasions with 3 different bands, and but that one really really hurt because I couldn't understand. There was no reasoning. So yeah, I'd been on a self-destruct path that was sort of exacerbated by my involvement with a very absurdly wealthy family, um, and I started to realize, that wow, this rock and roll kind of world is pretty crazy, but these people have elevated the game to new heights. I mean, I've seen a lot of shit in rock and roll touring over a long time, and I'd never seen anything like how these people were carrying on, man.
Yeah, and we're not going to name any names here, but these
We
were among
are
the
not.
wealthiest people. But these are some of the wealthiest people in human history. But go on.
Yeah, true. And so anyway, the drugs were free and
Yep.
available, and
As was a Ferrari that you were given and destroyed.
I did destroy the Ferrari. Yeah, I drove it through the part of the house. Unfortunately, it was a
These things
fucking
happen.
great. It was a 308 GTB. It was the Magnum PI car. It was a
In
beautiful
silver,
car.
right? Was it
It
silver?
was silver. It was.
Yeah, which
Yeah.
is grigio.
Yeah.
Go on.
Tragic. Yeah.
All right.
So yeah, anyway, the situation in there got to the point where I had to distance myself from it, and so then I got to the point where, of course, now I have to pay for my own drugs, and so that just spiraled, as it does. And I've had, I had dear friends tell me, what's going to happen, and it actually, it absolutely did happen. And so yeah, now I'm in a whole new world. I'm in a world of in which I had to survive. So now the point wasn't really, making a good record. It was living through the next 10 minutes. I recall at one point it was, I watched the clock. If I could just make it through this minute, I got 9 more. And that's a pretty drastic situation to find yourself in, especially from my prior experiences, which were vastly different from that. But I had to acclimate to that world in order to not be killed or dragged. One of the things they say is, you have to sign a document saying, what do you want us to do with your body? And
Jesus.
that's not a very reassuring thing. And it was a world of racial segregation, the organization within the prison system in California is that by the inmates. The leaders of each faction are up in Pelican Bay up north, and they're like lifers and stuff. And so that was very foreign to me. And it's very strict. Like you can't, sit next to a person of different ethnicities, and even and then there was a lot of gang stuff. So the Sureños, the Southern California people of Mexican descent, and then the Norteños, and there was a feud going on with them. There were no Asian people anywhere to be seen because there was a green light on them for whatever reason. It was a gang thing. So if they were housed anywhere near another, it was immediately kill on sight. So those things, and you have to walk certain areas, you can't smoke certain cigarettes in
Yeah,
the
you called me and
yeah,
told me that because you were the
yeah,
only white person I've ever known that smoked Cool Kings, and I
right. And
remember
they're like,
I'm gonna
"No,
tell
man, that's like
you're like
ethnically
you're like,
questionable."
"What?
You know, what do you
You
do?
were white and you had to smoke Marlboros." But I remember when I first moved to LA, I was so broke. I would come over to your apartment and I would take one of your empty Cool King packs and fill it full of Marlboro Lights. So then when I would go to a bar and someone would try to bum a smoke off me, I'd be like, "It's a Cool." They'd be like, "No, thanks," and they'd go bum off someone
Yeah,
else. That was
yeah, it
my
was a
little
great
life
little
hack.
angle. It was a great little angle. You little
All
son
right,
of a
so
bitch.
go. All right,
Yeah.
so go on. So
Uh,
talk. Go on.
yeah. I mean, it's violent, incredibly violent. People have different
Which
experiences, but there were riots and then cop uh, retaliation for riots. You know, it's law.
what?
It's a lawless place. It's the cops and you, and they're going to win every time. But they're not beholden to any civil rights organizations or health inspectors. There's no one. It's their world. And so, you can. There was a guy one time, a sergeant said, "Here's the complaint box. You know, take a form and write your complaint." And then a bunch of big guys went in there and wrote their complaints. Well, and they all went to the fucking solitary confinement in the hole. So it's instant retaliate. There's no justice. You've already passed that
No,
state. There's you have no rights. You've surrendered your rights to the
your
state.
property.
You're a number. And so that, is I I certainly don't recommend it, but it certainly will make you appreciate every freedom that you are afforded once you're on release. Even the littlest things. And however, I will say that because it's a lot of these rules within the system are a product of the environment. It's close quarters. Everyone's like
Yeah.
really, really, really close together. That they've adapted a lot of things, a lot of sort of rules within, organically within the population that keep things, you know, uh, just shy of boiling over. And so they, you tend to say, "Excuse me." You tend to respect the person in front of you in line. You don't get in line. And when I was released, after a pretty significant time, I observed, that there would be people cutting in front of you in line at the grocery store, and your first instinct is to, pick up a rock and cave their skulls in. Unfortunately, because that's your level of if you don't react, you're going to continue to be taken advantage of. And so,
Yeah.
that was really a lot of it. And I came to realize that some of those rules maybe it'd be great if they were applied in free society as well.
Yeah, I remember you and I had lunch shortly after you got out of the can, and we went to a restaurant, and you kind of picked up a butter knife. It was me, you, and Paula, and I was like, "What's going on?" And you were like, "This is the first time I've held a metal utensil." I'm like, "Don't get any ideas, pal."
Yeah. I mean, you
But
don't
it, but
have
it,
any of
but it
that
was so,
stuff.
but it was so foreign to you. And
It
do you
was.
remember do you remember when Jimmy wouldn't let me visit him in jail because he just didn't want me to see him like that? But I was just trying to do what I could to make him laugh. Do you remember when I sent you that photo with the two adult film stars?
I do. I still have it in here somewhere.
I s-
And
I
that's
said,
a great way. Getting incarcerated is a great way to find out, who exactly, gives a shit. Other than, of course, the gossiping about it to each other, and which does you no good. So there were very few people who took the time to write, or even fewer to show up. I did discourage that, yeah.
Yeah, but
thank you for that.
I was doing I was out of music and I was building websites, and and during this particular year, which I think was 99 or 2000, I was doing two giant websites at the same time. I was doing the largest Christian television ministry in America, and I was doing Jenna Jameson, the biggest adult film star probably in history. And
Right.
so I went to go visit Jenna's set, and I said, "Can I get a photo with you girls?" And it's me and Jenna and three women wearing strap-on eggplants. And so
Yeah, I'm amazed.
just to make
I'm,
Jimmy laugh, I printed it out and then I wrote in Sharpie, "Hey Jimmy, get out soon. I got big plans for you." Now tell the story of what happened after that and the brothers.
which brothers? The what?
You had told me that that it was considered bad form to not share your pictures and mails with other
Ah,
inmates because they were so bored. And you
uh,
were in the cafeteria and these three scary guys come walking up to you and asked you about this photo. Ring a
oh yeah,
bell?
yeah, yeah. Well, everybody would trade. I mean, it's a miracle it got through because most of that stuff is censored. So it was quite a unique item to have. But yeah, man, it was popular among the cell block there. It was
Well, you told
quite
me
an
these
item.
guys you told me these three black guys came up to you and they said, "Yo, you the guy with that picture?" And you were like, yeah, and you're terrified. You didn't know why these guys were coming up to you. And one of them said, "Is that Jenna Jameson in that photo?" And you go,
Uh,
yeah. And he goes, "Those women were wearing penises. Were those penises for each other or for your friend?" And he goes, "Oh, this was a lesbian porno. They were for each other." And he says, one guy says to his two friends, "Go, see, I knew that guy wasn't gay. I knew they were for each other." And then they're like, "What's your name, man?" And then those guys that you said protected you because you were down.
Well, yeah. I mean, it was a popular item in around the place, but I wouldn't have been able to fraternize with those guys, unfortunately. But I did keep it with me for quite a while, and maybe it turned up in some of my other housing arrangements in the either before or after.
Well,
But
James,
yeah,
I do what I can.
yeah. But normally, you're not allowed to fraternize at all with these guys. But I did have a lot of encounters, and I made a lot of friends on both sides, and then they were very suspicious of how I was able to speak Spanish because you're not supposed to communicate. And so the white guys were like, what are you doing talking to these guys, and what are you saying and all this crazy stuff. So again, the ability to speak foreign languages and stuff worked in my disfavor or favor, however you choose to look at it. but yeah, it was a wild thing, and it the drug thing in general. Believe what people tell you, and but also, it can be it can be a lot of fun for a while. But I think the point there's a certain point with certain drugs that you tend to lose your sense of humor. And I would suggest to anyone, everyone's got their own experience. People are going to try it. Some people aren't. Some people are going to condemn it without knowing anything about it. But with it can't, with heroin specifically, it involves a very protracted withdrawal that can last year. Or more, depending. Some people, everyone's different. Mine lasted. The lasting effects of it took ages to overcome. And but the biggest loss out of that was my sense of humor. When you stop laughing. So do the funny drugs. Don't do the ones that make you stop Stop laughing.
Yeah, and when you got out, you were humbled, and I had a deep respect for you because it's really easy to get spoiled being a band guy and getting lots of passport stamps and flying private and playing sold out shows. And I remember you were working, I think, at like a really menial assembly line job, like putting guitar strings in boxes or whatever. Maybe you had I can't remember, but you had some menial jobs, and you stayed humble, and you weren't sure if there was ever going to be a path to you ever getting back into music.
Yeah.
And then you called me one day and said, "Hey, I got a gig." And I said, "What's the gig?" And you said, "Buckcherry." And I was like, I don't really see that as they've been around a long time as a hard rock band, but that really wasn't your kind of music. Walk me through that process. Was it Keith Nelson who called you?
I think I was hanging clothes at a Salvation Army.
Yeah,
At the
that's a
at the
long
time.
fall from grace. Yeah.
In Van Nuys. Yeah, I was hanging clothes. And you had to do a certain amount in a certain length of time, so it was like fucking man. And there's a million stories behind that scenario as well.
Yeah.
It's quite funny. But yeah, so I didn't know who Buckcherry was. I had been sort of in a haze for several years when they had hits and stuff. I remember taking the bus like downtown to score dope, and they had like the album cover on the bus bench. I'm like, who the fuck are these guys? They got bus benches, and something must be going on. And then it just didn't occur to me that like years later when I met Keith, who was very and continues to be a very supportive guy, and he loved the Juju Hounds album, and so I happened at some like country honky tonk watching my dear friend Mike Stinson in the early phases of his career, and I had Rick Richards with me, and we were at the bar, and Rick is a very recognizable character, and
Yes.
whereas I can be invisible, which is very convenient, by the way. So Keith spots Rick and comes over, and at some point in the conversation, I hear, and I'm like kind of, head down on the bar, and he says, whatever happened to that bass player in the Juju Hounds? And Rick's like, right here, man. So, and I'm like, nearly unresponsive on the bar. And but then Keith got my number. We exchanged numbers and whatnot, and then he proceeded to we established a friendly relationship prior to the regrouping of his band. And then he just called me one day and said, would you consider doing this record, which is basically all I was aware of at the time, and I hadn't played on a record in a proper studio in a long time, so I agreed. And
you didn't even have a bass, I don't think.
I didn't, and the opportunity was there to also participate as a band member and sort of write song or help be involved in the creation process of this thing, which is it's not a band to me unless that's what it is. So that was kind of
for sure.
And
I didn't know their music really either. I just knew, I was friends for many years with Steve Jones, the founder of the Sex Pistols, and I knew he produced their first record, and that was about the extent that I knew. But go on.
Yeah. So there was there were a lot of, it was top shelf recording crew, the engineers, everybody was very experienced guys. It was big league stuff, but there was no label or any intimation that the thing was going to do anything. In fact, I think every label had already passed. So all the majors had already passed on it. No, there was a thing of the past, and I think it was like they'd had hit songs like 5 years prior. It wasn't that long, So
right.
So everything was moving pretty quickly even then. But so we did the record, and then at the very end, it was like sort of like, well, we need one more song. We're gonna, and they brought in the song that they had written earlier. So you play on this, and it was It was the Crazy Bitch song, which I, recoiled at initially because it's certainly not in my wheelhouse. And
No, it's
and
like a strip
so,
club song, but it rocks.
well, we didn't know that. I mean, obviously, we didn't know, and I'm like, maybe nobody's gonna listen to this fucking record anyway, So I played it and we stuck it on there.
Yeah.
And of course, that's the one that people sort of latched on to, for better or for worse, because I think we made some decent records
Yeah, and
that I
I
think
honestly, I'm not saying
were
this to blow smoke up
overshadowed.
your ass, but the bass
Yeah,
and the drums to me are what make that song. That the lead vocal, of course, too. But to me, that's a very groovy hard rock song.
well, it says fuck a lot, and I think that's what initially people gravitated to, because to set the scenario, looking back on it, it was 2005. And so the internet was a relatively new thing. Social media hadn't really blossomed into the juggernaut that is, ubiquitous. And so it was to have a MySpace account or whatever was fun, because you could see like dirty stuff on the internet for the first time. It was still an independent landscape to a degree.
Right.
And so, of course, and then some radio guys, when there were still guys manning the thing, we figured out a way to bleep out the fucks, right? So they put a little duck quack or something in it. I think there was one radio station in Arizona that did it, and then that started the snowball, because everyone loved it. And so then we did a video that had actual girls topless in it. So now we got fucking, we got tits, and that it turns out, after all this introspection, that it's cuss words and boobs that do the trick.
Well, I think it was P.T. Barnum who said no one's ever gone broke underestimating the intelligence of the American people.
Man, it was very informative.
But I was so happy for you, because you were back playing arenas and sometimes stadiums and big theaters. And I remember, just by dumb luck, anyone who knows me knows I hate Las Vegas like Hamas hates Jews. And my little Chinese girlfriend at the time, who'd never seen or done anything, was just like, "Can we go to Vegas?" And I'm like, "Only if we stay in a place that doesn't have a casino." So she found I think it's called The Hotel at Mandalay Bay, and it's like its own hotel within a hotel. So we're checking in. We got our rollerboard bags, and we're passing the House of Blues, and it says tonight, Buckcherry. And I'm like, I have a friend who's in that band. I'm gonna hit him up. So I call you, and you were like, "Yeah, I'm in the diner downstairs." So she and I came over there, and she'd never been to any concert in her whole life, and she's like, "Ooh, I met rock stars." And I'm like, kind of.
Wow.
And we came to that show, and it was really fun, but it was just dumb luck. I just happened to be walking by, and then we had something to do in Vegas that wasn't around gambling or Cirque du Soleil. And that's when I got to, met Keith, and it turned. Oh, and who I was sitting next to at dinner before the show was Mitzi Martin, who I had known for years before, because she was a model. And I was just like, "What are you doing here?" And she was like, "Oh, my husband plays in this band." And I was like, "Buckcherry?" She's like, "Yeah." And I'm like, "Oh, my friend plays bass." And then that was really fun.
Yeah. It was a whole confluence of events that came together. I don't know how, but
But he had a great run.
But within a span of a very short time, I went from hanging at the close at the Salvation Army to being at the Grammys. We got nominated for a Grammy. So I was so it just, one thing flowed into another, and I stayed for a good 9 years, which is nearly a decade in that band. And initially it was a very international experience. We were playing the whole world, and which is what I look for in a band. that's the goal. You know, there's nothing better than writing a song in one country and then flying to the other side of the world and they've heard it. You know, there's no better
I
reward. Yeah,
I
and
can't even imagine. I can't even
there
imagine
is
what it's even like to get used to that. Yeah.
for me that is the goal. It's always been the goal. So in my first band, when I was barely out of my teens, it was first signed band. That was the goal. Are we going to Japan? When are we going to Japan? You know, and
But it
unfortunately,
must be. But it must be surreal when people are playing along, singing along to songs that you guys wrote at 4 a.m.
well, that's the reward. There is no better reward. I mean, in my experience, money comes and money goes.
Yeah, but the stage, yeah. I mean, I knew you when you were flat broke. I knew you when you had a brand new Aston Martin, and it does come and go. It reminds me of an old Keith Richards interview where some young guy in his early 20s, an English guy's interviewing Keith Richards, to get back to him for a second. And he goes, 50 years of rocking and rolling. What's it like, mate? And Keith has tried his best to be polite. And he goes, mate, it's more like 48 years of being in airports and talking to blokes like you and about 2 years of rocking and rolling. You don't even know a world without the sun, the moon, and the stones, because the stage time is a scintilla of the total experience, the blood, sweat, tears, and toil it is to do something. People only see the end work.
Yeah. I mean, that is the thing. And it's not necessarily attention, because attention is a double-edged sword. But for you to go somewhere and have fans are you can't, everybody's an individual human being, right? So I mean, you can have great ones and you can have very rude ones, and the ones that are polite you give all the time in the world to, but the ones who aren't, you try to get away from as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, it's a big world out there with a lot of people in it, so you are open to those things, both sides of those things, but you try to remember the ones who are polite or with whom you can have a conversation with. And many of them have become friends with the proliferation again in social media and stuff. There's some guys that I enjoy talking to. Many don't, and we never had that. I couldn't hit Mick Jagger in his DMs and ask him what he had for breakfast. And of course he could you don't have to answer it, but some people will get angry with you, as if they deserve to know what you had for breakfast, and they fucking don't. So that's just the way it is. And so it's as the world has changed, and now everyone has fans. It's not you don't have to actually do anything in order to gain them, and they consider that their fan base. And so it's very interesting to see how it's sort of balanced out to this it's like a universal thin coating of oatmeal around the globe, where it's impossible to distinguish anymore.
I know. I'm nobody, and I got recognized in Piazza Vittorio in Milan. I'm walking through the square with a cone of chocolate gelato in my hand, and this British couple from Yorkshire comes up to me. "Excuse me," I said, "Yeah," and I thought they were going to ask me for directions. They said, "Are you the whore whisperer from TikTok?" I said, "Oh my God, I am the whore whisperer." And they were like, "We love you. You're so delightful." And I said, "Oh, thank you so much." And I was getting newlywed vibes from them. And I go, "Did you guys just get married?" They said, how did you know? And I said, I just have a feel for these things. Wait right here. I want to give you guys a wedding present. And they were like, what? I'm like, wait right here. Don't go anywhere. And I had just come from a very posh, very zillionaire wedding in Lake Como. And in the gift bag in the hotel room was a magnum of vintage Dom Perignon. And I'm not schlepping a magnum of Dom Perignon back to LA. I barely have room in my luggage for what I have. So I ran up my hotel right off the Piazza di Duomo, and I grabbed a bottle of champagne and I give them this. I was like, congratulations on your wedding. And they're like, what do you want for it? And I said, a group hug. And we all hugged, and it was just really sweet. And I got I thought I was going to get arrested. I got recognized by a black lady LA cop outside of a Brazilian jazz concert in downtown LA. And she's like, where I know you from? And I said, I'm pretty sure we've never met. She goes, no, I never forget a face. I know you from somewhere. And I was like, I really don't think so. And I'm getting nervous. And she goes, all right. And then she comes back and she goes, you're the mother effing sugar coach from TikTok, aren't you? And I go, yeah, yes, I am. And she goes, I effing love you. I'm like, I love you too. We fist bumped. And then my friend's girlfriend has been on a soap opera for 25 years and has won Dancing with the Stars. And she goes, I've been on a network TV show for 25 years. I've never once been recognized in LA. And you've been on TikTok for 10 minutes and people know who you are. And I'm like, yeah, you're just hot. I look like a boiled ham. So yeah.
A boiled
So yeah,
ham.
if everyone's famous, nobody's famous.
True. And congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
And I and be very careful, because I can go both ways.
Yes.
But I'm happy for your proliferation on
So
fan
far
base.
so far it's been pretty manageable. I just, I'll get unsolicited nudes from middle-aged housefraus, but that's okay. I don't mind.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it can go both ways. One of the things that has just prompted a memory that when we were starting the band, one of the first things he said was, you got some songs, you got the guys, we're gonna, like up and over. But then he said, and we're gonna make a record, but we're not gonna do it in Hollywood. And so he rented a place out far away from Los Angeles, and I always noted that, and we kept moving, and in fact we never played Los Angeles. We never played
this was Izzy.
Yeah. And over the years, music community, my experiences here in Los Angeles, however, this can happen, and it does happen everywhere. There's the music, it happens in Austin, it happens in Nashville, it happens in New York City, it's the same thing. But the musicians, they'll come to your gig, but a lot of them will come to your gig to, they're a lot happier if you fuck it up than they are if you do a good job. So
sure,
it's sort of like, playing on stage and you got a bunch of like vampires, that you're playing to, and it affects the show. And then it's still a relatively small community, and then people will be very quick to discount you for whatever reasons, and that's happened to me a myriad of times.
Or be Lenny Kravitz and just steal your guitar player.
Well, I don't mind that.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah, we were dead in the water, and Craig, I'm happy daily for him, and he's my brother. Unfortunately, we're the only two survivors who are alive,
broken arms,
of that band. So that was a snapshot in time, and that'll never happen again. And so that seems to be happening a lot. You wonder what happens when the Stones stop touring or stop making new music. And I think
may they outlive us all.
I think, yeah, indeed, and they might. But I think I wrote somewhere on like one of my silly Facebook post, but it was quite a succinct observation. Is that we rock and roll has died, but nobody's really that upset about it because we've caught it in a box and can take it out and look at it at any time. And every time I open my little box, there's a shitload of things I haven't seen before, which is wonderful. The access, however, I always note that there's no continuation. Nobody's replacing these guys, and for a myriad of reasons. But they don't. It doesn't bode well So, in essence, with the advent now of artificial intelligence and people, now it used to be several clicks, and now it's just one. You can push the button and it'll make a song.
Right,
for you.
but your pals, the Foo Fighters, are still doing it.
They are. They're alone in that. They're alone.
Well,
in that.
Metallica's still doing it. Maiden's still doing it, but those are legacy acts also.
And they're certainly not new.
True.
But what it can't do, what a machine will never be able to do, is perform a song live, unassisted by technology with actual instruments. And so if you know how to do that, that's really your only salvation. That's what you need to do. It doesn't matter what size the venue is. If it's in a bar to 5 people, it has as much value as anything else. And so but we're headed towards a post-talent society, because with young people, what is their incentive to learn how to play the guitar? What is their incentive to take a music lesson? Will the music curriculum disappear from schools, like a lot of other things have? With a finite, I mean, if a kid wants instant gratification, any jack off can hit the button and then outperform me on a streaming service, because he's going to create clone accounts. And we reward, in America especially, we tend to reward the cheaters and or the quick fix, the quick result.
I don't know. I like to believe that there are good parents out there. Like I not to cut you off, but I went on a first date with this woman recently, and I didn't know that her kids were going to be at the house. She had me come over, and she was going to cook me dinner, and then her daughter walks in, and she goes, "Go look at my daughter's bedroom." And I'm like, that's kind of a weird thing to ask for. I go in her daughter's bedroom, and she's got a Black Sabbath 4x4 poster and Nirvana and Zappa. And I was just like, how old are you? And she's like 20. And her bedroom looked like a Bleecker Street 1982 record store. I'm like, how do you know all this music? And she's like, good parents. So I like to hope that there are some people that are keeping the importance of culture and music, and not just letting people eat.
There will always be some people who see that. Unfortunately, it seems to be fewer and fewer, and in favor of the quick, in favor of convenience. We're throwing it all away in favor of convenience. Scott, I had the best parents in the world, and look what happened to me.
True that. Look at Bill Clinton and Roger Clinton. Same parents, same upbringing, 2 very different lives. Jimmy Carter and Billy Carter. I mean, the gene pool is a mysterious thing. I want to jump into some of the acts you supported real quick and see if you have a quick anecdote. I was at Stevie Ray Vaughan's last show at Alpine Valley the night he passed away with Eric Clapton and Robert Cray. I know you supported him. Do you have any stories about him? Did you know him? Did you meet him, or did you just open up for him?
No, we knew him, and we traveled a bit. And generally speaking, as a support act, you learn as much, if not more, from the road crew, professional road crew of the headliner, than you do from the musicians, especially with Stevie Ray Vaughan. There's only one, and there's only one of Double Trouble. Each of those guys, Whipper Layden, and they're individual guys, and you're not going to be able to do what they do. So you can just forget about
That's
that
right.
right out of the bat. So,
That's right.
but yeah, so you learn how to behave. You learn how to, you're welcomed into a professional situation. So you keep your eyes and ears open, and you do as you're fucking told by the crew guys, because they know
Yeah.
what's going on. So this was a particular, the show's a lot of. Unfortunately, the tour was cut short because of Stevie was wheeled away in an ambulance at one point. But we did the shows that we did do. We're in the arenas, arena, and an arena in America is invariably usually a sporting place for sporting events. So it's not for music. Theaters are for music. Stadiums and arenas are not.
For basketball.
Right, or hockey, whatever it is. So so you got you got ice under. You put a bunch of covering of the ice, and then all your guitars are going in and out of tune because of this temperature. Anyway, but these guys were Texas boys, clearly Austin, and they know what they're doing. So they would, we'd be sitting in our little freezing dressing room in a concrete building, and so we're in a little box in the room that we were assigned. It's got our name on, and every once in a while, you'd hear like clapping. These guys clapping, boys walking down the hall, not this one, man. And then they'd come into your room, and you're like, hey, what? And they're clapping, hey, this one, come on, boys, get the junk, we got to hook it up. These guys got the room, and they were testing the reverb in each backstage room of this arena, which they then would mic particularly the Leslie cabinet. So it's a big piece, with a fan, with a spinning element that spins, and
it's a spinning speaker that was designed for a
exactly
Hammond B3 organ originally, but it created the Doppler effect that Stevie Ray Vaughan, Jimi Hendrix, best known for using the Leslie a lot. But go on.
Yeah, and his keyboard player at the time was using one, and so they would mic that, the reverb in the room. They set up a mic and then run that out through front of house, which was innovative. I've never seen it before or since, and it just the level of attention that they had to make things
great sound
in with what they had. And so a lot of it is that, you're making the best of what you have with some imagination. And these guys were, top of the game. So yeah, we sound checked, and basically the deal was, we're not sure if we want, we went on the tour yet. We were recommended band. And so, the first gig, Stevie will decide. And so we were super nervous. Yeah, sound check. We're just like, and a bunch of things were going wrong, as they always do at sound check. And so we were just nervous about the show. And then we went back into the dressing room, and I just looked up after a few minutes, and Stevie Ray's at the door, like leaning against the door jamb, and he goes, don't worry about the sound check, boys. Y'all got the gig, So he was there. It was the little switch up.
How nice! Nice.
He was watching the sound check. So he did. It would have been a much longer tour had he not exploded his stomach or whatever it was.
Right. Another artist that's no longer with us, In Excess. Tell me about that tour, because you didn't get any bigger than them.
No, that one really there was very little interaction with the guys, other than a few head bobs and whatnot. And we did like the West Coast, I think, run with them, and but great band, and Michael especially, just a again consummate professional guys, and
right.
And I ended up spending more time with Michael Hutchence in Paris years later, and we had several wonderful nights out at the clubs in Paris where I got to know him a little bit more personally. But yeah, it was a
Nice.
wonderful experience, and it was a great opportunity for us. Unfortunately, you know, it's a hard sell when no one's ever heard of the opening band.
Sure.
But that's another thing I'd like to comment on, if I may.
Please.
That you know, when you there was an era where the headliner could choose, or it was expected to choose the opening act or the series of opening acts, and they would make sure to have a compatible band that their audience that they know would appreciate. And that does a lot of things. It creates a generally good show for everyone, and it stops people from going out to the bar and then coming back in. And so that has gone the way of people just buying on to. So bands headliners are accepting money. It's a cash grab again, and so you end up with a disparate, you know, completely, you know, you'll have a one
incompatible
band
act,
incompatible stuff, and so everyone's gone. You know, everyone leaves, or they wait to even arrive. Even worse,
right?
And also, what happens in a lot of these, again, I mentioned the sporting events. You know, you have people, the majority of people in the front, you know, 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 rows are season pass holders of sporting events. And so now, you know, a concert comes in with a big name band that they know, and they have the season pass. So now your front, you know, 20 rows, which is all you can see, by the way.
Sure.
You know, you can't see. And so now the people who come to see you are way in the back, and you only see them when they turn the lights on or at the very end of the show, you know, and there's off somewhere in the distance. Sure. Whereas the people in front are bored or uninterested or into sports, you know, and they came for the cousin or the neighbor or whatever. So that's your audience, the ones you can actually see. And that also, you know, can affect a performance. So there are a lot of changes that have ultimately driven me away from continuing that pursuit. There's nothing I can do to change it. And there have been a lot of, you know, the domination of, you know, Live Nation worldwide, buying up every venue and the ticket prices and all those things. So people don't, you know, people wonder why these things are poorly attended, is because young people can't afford to go to these shows. And so if I am to do anything in the future, it would be on a much, much smaller, frighteningly small stage, and probably elsewhere in the world, because I've found
the same thing has happened to photography.
Indeed, it has. And so I don't have that many, you know, I'm touring years or active years left, and I'm very grateful to have been able to participate in that, for better or for worse, for 4 decades. And I hope
it's a hell of a run.
And I hope some of the stuff that was made is appreciated or will be appreciated in the future. So that's really the point.
Just a couple more things, and then we got to wrap up. I know the great Rick Rubin saw magic in you and hooked you up with Joe Cocker. Can you talk about how he found you and how you got that gig?
Yeah, unfortunately, that was it was never released. I don't know the details of why or why not. But I think it was around the era that Rick had done wonders with the Johnny Cash, you know, record. And so he was being very experimental and finding artists. And I think the sentiment was to urge Joe back to sort of his period, like a Mad Dogs and Englishmen, a real rock and roll period, when he had become more of a crooner which is a very convenient thing to do, by the way. You know, you stay in one hotel in Vegas and you play the same thing every night.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think that was Rick's vision, and he is a visionary individual, and he's a vibe master. So he wants to assemble, you know, personalities that he sees something in. So he fetched me from London, where I was recording at Wessex Studios, and flew me back here to do this thing. And I was probably junior to anyone else in the room by 20 years. I was just amazed that I was there. And during that time, you know, the band was just ultra luminary guys, like the Tom Petty's band, the Heartbreakers guys, and some of Mick Jagger's band, and just
Who
like
was in
big,
it? Mike
you know,
Mike Chapman, Benmont Tench, all
Mike
these
Campbell.
legends.
Yeah, Mike Campbell.
Sorry.
And Benmont, and Kurt Biscaro was on drums, who was Mick's drummer. And there was talk of and in fact, Malcolm Young came down from ACTC, came down at one point to sort of, he was being, you know, he was trying to be, Rick was urging him to join it as well, which, you know, was just wild. It was a wild assembly of folks. But I found, you know, and we did, you know, 5 or 6 songs or something. And I think we did a couple of Robbie Robertson tunes. From Robbie Robertson was from the band.
The band, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, and which were glorious tunes, and the performance, everything was live, so we were all in the same room, and everyone was sober, which was sort of uncharted territory. I wasn't that accustomed to being, you know, around, but you know, so Joe showed up, you know, and he with a bunch of weed and a pipe, you know, in his top pocket, and he kind of wanted to break the ice, I think. But I was the only one who you know, joined him, because he was in the vocal booth, so we kind of Cheech and Chonged it, where we smoked up the whole place.
You hotboxed the booth.
Yeah, so that was a moment I won't forget. But the songs were just amazing to play, and again, I don't read music, so someone plays music there, and I ended up, you know, when that happens, you look at the keyboard player, if you can get a look at his left hand. So I was watching Benmont's left hand and just trying to follow that. And it was a lot of, you know, hand signals and things like that, because the arrangements weren't really solidified, and it was a glorious thing. Unfortunately, it was never released. I don't think Joe. In fact, I have a clandestine recording of it, and at the very end of the song, we were getting a little rambunctious and musically, and you can hear Joe say in the fade, yeah, it got a little athletic towards the end.
That's a good adjective.
I thought that was the greatest description of being a little overzealous with the rock. And and so yeah,
go ahead.
So it just ultimately never will be released.
Okay, real quick, and then we gotta go. I'm getting it in my ear. Joan Jett and Jerry Lee Lewis. Give me a couple quick stories, and then we gotta wrap.
Oh man, Jerry Lee was a treat, man. You know, it was a weird thing with Jerry Lee. Yeah. It was at a period where I think he just had some like stomach. He had most of his intestines removed. I think it was he was left with like a straight pipe from his mouth, and so he looked like a kind of waxy, you know. He looked like a kind of a wax figure, but he was a very funny man. But you know, you didn't know how close you wanted to get to him, like even physically, right? Because we had adjoining rooms, and so I kept hearing this, like it was at a club, and I kept hearing this thump, 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 you know, against the wall, like right behind my head, and so I finally had to go investigate what it was. And I knew his room was next door, and the door was open. So I walked past him, and there's a young lady on his lap, and several crates of champagne, and several of the empty bottles that he'd already drank. And and he had a brace of throwing knives, like sort of situated on his thing, and he was chucking these knives into the wall that would have been directly, my head was on the other side of the wall, which was outrageous. But an interesting thing I noted about him later on, just observing how he operated, he did a little meet and greet, which I'd never really seen before, but there was a line of people. And every time it was a woman, he said, "What's your name, darling?" And she'd say, "My name's Carol." And he'd go, "Carol?" And he tried to make up a lyric using the name. So he was using the people as inspiration. And I certainly hope he did write a song named Carol at one point in time.
Right on. Okay, last one. Joan Jett and the Blackhearts.
Joan was fun. Again, it was a crew thing. It was a blizzard of whatever year that was, and we were in a van, and so we'd arrived to the venue, and all the guys, all the crew guys were outside, all bundled up, and you'd see a quick exchange of money happen. I'm like, "What's going on?" After a few days of this, "What's going on?" "Oh, we're taking bets on whether you're all dead or not." On the side of the road, we're taking bets on whether you'd make it to the gig. So that was that. And she had a bunch of hits at the time. But knowing Joan prior to that a bit, and her her persona and things, it was kind of a bit of an uncomfortable time, because she'd had hits, and when you have hits, people want you to change things inexplicably. There's no reasoning for it, but they want you to. And so they were sort of dolling her up as like a sex symbol, which, if you know anything about her at all, that's probably not a great move. But so she was, there's a lot of makeup and a lot of, they can make you look however they want you to look. And unfortunately, that's what was happening at the time. But she had, huge hits, and it's up to how much you want to sacrifice, how much you want to pay for those. And I think the price is increasingly higher.
Yeah. All right, Jimmy, this was an amazing conversation. I want to thank you for taking time out, and it's always a blast.
Oh, my pleasure.
And let's continue this over lunch one of these days. And that's it.
Yeah. All right, buddy boy. Take care of yourself. Good luck with everything. Yeah, we'll see you around.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Cheers.
All right. Bye.
Bye. The Bad Decisions podcast was produced by Cam Borum and Brock Workman of Hurrdat Media. Be sure to like and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts so you'll never miss an episode. You can also purchase my book, The Big Book of Bad Decisions, wherever books are sold. A special thanks to today's guest, Jimmy Ashhurst, for joining me today. I'm your host, Scott Nathan. Thanks for listening.